when the boy was born, like old Spartans, he was inspected. If he'd been small or puny, he would have been discarded.
Behold, the Georgia Guidestones. These granite monoliths mysteriously appeared about 40 years ago. The 4 slabs of granite each have 10 guiding principles of truth and harmony. They're inscribed in English, Russian, Chinese, Arabic. The list of languages goes on.
Inscribed on them in 8 languages are what seem to be rules for a future post-apocalyptic civilization. Building a modern Stonehenge that acts as an astronomical calendar with 10 commandments inscribed upon it, one of which says that you should guide reproduction wisely, and another that says it'd be a really good idea to have a world population under 10% of what it currently is. All the best secret societies, after all, do put up giant monuments advertising their goals for the world.
So not that long ago, I bought a book called The Case for Sterilization. It was a pro-eugenics book. It was written in the 1930s, I believe. Page 1, this is an American book. They say, while we don't agree with everything Hitler's doing, so the correlation between this, what you were talking about, the early progressives in the early 20th century and later on, it did in many ways lead to Nazism and just horrific things.
But people that don't know, the center of eugenics was London at first, then New York, then Berlin, Germany. So when you talk about progressives and eugenics, I mean, this is where Hitler got it. Explain that.
Yeah, in the early 20th century, late 19th century, that using science, right? And the science is settled. If we scientifically engineer a society, we can breed a better race.
Brave New World is about a futuristic society that has tried to create a perfect community where everyone is happy. They use science to mass-produce people and condition them to do and want only the things they're supposed to. But in doing that, they take away freedoms, like the freedom to think for oneself. The book starts with the director of the Central London Hatching and Conditioning Center explaining to a group of students how they create people, since women don't actually get pregnant anymore. The director brings the group into one of the conditioning rooms. Nurses lay out flowers and books and then bring in a group of babies. Then they shock the babies through an electrified strip in the floor. Over time, the babies will learn to instinctively dislike books and nature. These babies are deltas, one of the society's lower castes, and the lower castes perform non-intellectual jobs like factory work. By conditioning the delta babies to hate books, the society ensures that they won't ever have any desire for them.
Okay, like Matt Stone and Trey Parker. Matt Stone is beta, Trey Parker is alpha. Except in social situations, then Matt Stone is alpha and Trey Parker's beta. It's not negative to be beta. Like when you're the way that the South Park episode goes, Trey Parker is the alpha dog. But if you're if you're interviewing Trey Parker and Matt Stone, if you're at a party, Matt Stone is alpha, Trey is kind of shy and relaxes and looks to Matt for security, protection, guidance, all that shit.
If when I was young, if I wanted to marry somebody, I won't even bother what the caste is. I never asked. Actually, this happened to me. My wife, I never asked what's her caste. I just came home one day and told my father, I'm marrying this girl. He asked, who is she? I said, her name. I only knew her pet name, I didn't know her full name. Because that's what I called her. Then he asked, who is her father? I said, I don't know. He said, what? You don't know the father's name, you'll marry her? I said, I wish to marry only the girl.
The caste system is a traditional form of stratification from Hinduism that classifies people into 4 different groups. The caste one is born into will determine his or her social status, job, diet, and behavior. This 3,000-year-old system still to this day has a significant impact on Indian society. Historically, there were 4 castes. Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas are known as the general castes or upper castes, while Shudras was the bottom caste. Each caste is further broken down into 25,000 subcastes. Each subcaste has a designated profession that, theoretically, its members must follow.
The group continues into an outdoor garden, where several hundred naked children are engaged in erotic play. This play conditions the children to grow up feeling comfortable being sexually promiscuous.
I'd like to say my name is Lisa Ann, but you all know that by now, and I've been a part of the sex industry my entire adult life. Obviously, I'm not anti-porn. The focus years ago in the early 90s, when I first started to shoot sex scenes, was to have and capture great sex. Then came the internet. Flash forward to now. I'm often recognized by 10 and 12-year-olds. Many of them want me to meet their dad, hoping that I will be their stepmom, and that they could then have sex with me. Well, I walk away feeling that we, the industry, have failed by not having a stricter age gate, by having endless amounts of porn freely accessible with no credit card to minors in the palm of their hands.
The prophet they're praising is Henry Ford, who introduced the assembly line and revolutionized mass production. And they all take soma to feel like they're dissolving into one unified whole. Finally, they break out into dance, then dim the lights and have an orgy, while a voice says a refrain that begins with the phrase, orgy porgy.
I think we should get naked.
What?
Don't ask questions.
I covered my shyness with a megalomania and a exhibitionism. Some might even call it psychotic behavior. I hated myself. I hated everybody else.
You are coming from a good family, right?
I grew up in like Leave It to Beaver, you know, it was suburbia. For whatever reason, I was an angry, maladjusted kid. I hated college, and this sort of outlaw, piratical attitude of the chefs appealed to me.
Of the entire planet.
So what are you thinking?
We're out of a job. Don't you mean extinct?
Sometimes, after biting a dinosaur, the mosquito would land on the branch of a tree and get stuck in the sap. This fossilized tree sap, which we call amber, waited for millions of years with the mosquito inside. Using sophisticated techniques, they extract the preserved blood from the mosquito and, bingo, dino DNA. We use the complete DNA of a frog to fill in the holes and complete the code. And now we can make a baby dinosaur.
In a lab at the Salk Institute, a scientist sucks human stem cells into a tube. Another injects them into a pig embryo. And at that moment, a cross-species embryo, a chimera, both human and pig, begins. The goal is eventually, the embryos will grow into a pig with a human organ ready for harvest.
When we talk about chimera, people always think about the lion head, goat body, and serpent tail monster. There are many cultures, the chimeras actually are deities.
No, we haven't had a Christmas in 100 years.
What? No presents for 100 years?
Always winter, never Christmas. It's been a long winter. But you would have loved Narnia in summer.
Father, I must ask a question.
Please.
What am I? I call you father, yet we are not like you. What are we?
The fact that they're trying to use gene editing tools to change the nature of human beings is not surprising, because this is who they really are. And we had that similar experience, did we not? With Nazism and that authoritarian regime trying to conduct human experiments to do the very same thing.
And they were fantastic there, but they were able to say, "Oh, you got to leave me here. He'll be dead in 48 hours." I'm like, "Oh." And I thought, "Well, what can I do?" My brother says, "Why don't you look into these adult stem cells?" I'm like, I've heard things about this, You end up with an extra asshole or something. But, by this time informed, and he just said to me, "Well, he's 92. He says, "What the hell have you got to lose?" And I said, "No, nothing. Let's go." So I'm up for it.
And so what was his response to this IV treatment?
That he's almost 100 years old. And from pretty bad shape, it was like bee stings. It was like he got a new lease of life, which fixed all his inflammation and pain, and he started walking again. And his kidneys were good, and his heart, he had a prolapsed valves in there, and they healed. And his cognitive powers improved. His eyesight improved.
Whoa.
You know, and other stuff improved that he would hate me to talk about.
I had heard about Dr. Kotaro Yoshimura in Japan, who had successfully regrown the breasts of over 400 Japanese women who had lost their breast to cancer. So I tracked him down. I brought him over here. I hooked him up with a surgeon in the Los Angeles area. They took the fat from my stomach, boo-hoo, and this is in lay speak, in a sophisticated technology like a centrifuge, whipped it around at supersonic speed and extracted my stem cells, again, for a lack of a better term, took a turkey baster and injected into this breast, and poof, wow. And to me, the ramifications of what this can mean for the future uses of stem cells, I think of our enlisted people, and we're not that far away from being able to regrow limbs. And
mostly for my health, for my mortality more than anything. Subconsciously, I think that's what's the reason why I did it, just to get healthy. And then I meet a doctor and say, hey, you know, you should do this and you should try stem cell. I'm like, you never tried stem cell, but this is what really got me interested in this stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I had the opportunity to talk to Ken Shamrock.
Okay.
And so he came in, and I looked at him, I said, fuck, he looked incredible. What the fuck? Hey, what are you doing right now? Why you look like that? How'd that happen? And he said it was in Colombia, and I said, where? And I'm going tomorrow.
So we bred ourselves into castes. Some to be our eyes and ears, some to be our muscles and sinews.
Oh, you mean you're hunters?
Bred to be predators. And for those who are suitable to be breeding vessels for our other colonies.
Have you not considered the human cost of what it is you're doing?
We all pay a price. They would exhaust the food supply in a matter of months.
Food supply? They're human beings.
Who are you to question 800,000 years? Of evolution.
They used to say that a child conceived in love has a greater chance of happiness. They don't say that anymore. I'll never understand what possessed my mother to put her faith in God's hands rather than those of her local geneticist. Now, only seconds old, the exact time and cause of my death was already known.
Attention deficit disorder, 89% probability. Heart disorder, 99% probability. Life expectancy, 30.2 years.
Genetics, what can it mean? The ability to perfect the physical and mental characteristics of every unborn child.
Our DNA will determine everything about us. Determines where you can work, who you should marry, what you're capable of achieving. In a society where success is determined by science, one man's only chance
How do you expect to pull this off? I don't know exactly.
is to hide his own identity
This is the last day that you're gonna be you and I'm gonna be me.
by borrowing someone else's.
Congratulations. What about the interview? That was it.
Do you think you'd be doing?
How do you hide when we all shed 500 million cells a day? Welcome to Gattaca.
The doctor who sparked global outrage by claiming to produce the world's first genetically modified babies faced his peers for the first time at this conference in Hong Kong.
I feel proud, actually.
I feel proudest.
As you can see, there's a big demand to know exactly what you did.
How you understand your responsibility to these children.
Shenzhen-based He Jinkui used a gene editing technology called CRISPR to engineer twin girls whose DNA was designed to resist the HIV infection.
The world has moved on to the stage for embryo gene editing. There will be someone somewhere who's doing this. If it's not me, it's someone else.
Drink more than you used to.
Yes. My husband died in a tragic hunting accident.
Must have been traumatic for you.
My only daughter was shipped off to Dawn. We suffered through a siege.
Well, a short siege.
Now I'm marrying my eldest son to a wicked little bitch from Highgarden. Well, I'm supposed to marry her brother, a renowned pillow biter, so...
Father disowned me today.
He can't disown you. You're all he's got.
You're forgetting Tyrion. Something's changed.
Everything's changed. You come back after all this time with no apologies on one hand and expect everything to be the same.
What do you want me to apologize for?
For leaving me.
You think I wanted to be taken prisoner?
Don't know what you wanted. You weren't here. You left me. Alone.
Is that Mr. Gump? Mrs. Gump?
He's on vacation.
I murdered people so I could be here with you.
It took too long.
What are you saying?
I'm saying you took too long.
We have something called the American Eugenics movement. And the American Eugenics movement, who at the time really misunderstood the science. If this is true, if we have this kind of concept of heredity, then we should be able to breed much better populations. And we can do so through selective breeding by trying to encourage people who have what we think of as preferential traits to have children together. And we can, by doing so, get rid of some really undesirable traits, such as, and the ones they were really focused on were things like criminality, as if that's just one trait, or epilepsy, or imbecility. That was a really popular one, which is we just had to get rid of these imbeciles. And what happened is a lot of states started having better baby competitions where people would actually then have photographs of the multiple generations, which they measured by things like height, or color of skin, or color of hair. And it was used and incorporated to try to combat things like immigration policies, because people believed that immigrant populations were bringing bad traits into the population, or to try to increase the amount of sort of intelligence that they thought we might have in the population, and to decrease some of the more problematic traits.
Jeffrey Epstein sat quietly in court, no visible signs of any physical trauma, just days after being found semi-conscious in his jail cell with marks on his neck. Epstein wanted to use the ranch for controlled breeding, using his DNA to improve humanity. Citing 2 award-winning scientists and an advisor to large companies and wealthy individuals, the article reports Epstein surrounded himself with leading scientists and would tell them he wanted to have 20 women impregnated at a time on the ranch. There's no evidence Epstein ever set his plan into motion, and his attorneys did not respond to our request for comment.
There seems to be no end to the Jeffrey Epstein saga. Well, really true that somebody wants to do a genetic dating app. That sounds very just crazy, but that it has actually a connection to Epstein. He's dead, but we're still learning a lot about his past and all of his connections.
Church received money from Epstein between 2006 and 2005 and 2007. Epstein had his own twisted ideas about genetics and the way things should work. The offender hosted scientific conferences where he talked about the desire to propagate his own genome. I guess that's sex offender genome that he had. How many asked did he want to do this? And this is the interesting part of it. Well, his idea was impregnating about 20 women at a time at his New Mexico ranch.
In 2003, a team studying the male or Y chromosome in Asian men made an astonishing discovery. 8%, or roughly 16 million men in Central Asia, share a common male ancestor who lived around 900 years ago. The warrior king Genghis Khan started a dynasty that impregnated whole nations for more than 150 years.
There's a book called War of the Week that actually shows how a group in the United States with Franklin Roosevelt and Carnegie and Rockefeller and a group including Alexander Graham Bell actually started this notion of eliminating certain people from being cared And there was a summit, a world summit, that Hitler attended, and then he took that notion and adapted it into his philosophy. So it was actually a born...
Ashton, I want to shake your hand.
Philosophy.
In 1859, Charles Darwin published a book which caused an incredible stir. The book's complete title was On the Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life.
The trouble with Scotland is that it's full of Scots. Perhaps the time has come to reinstitute an old custom. Grant them prima nocte, first night. When any common girl inhabiting their lands is married, our nobles shall have sexual rights to her on the night of her wedding. If we can't get them out, we'll breed them out.
It's not just an idea of ape-like creatures supposedly changing into people. It's much more than that. It's really a whole way of thinking. It's really a philosophy of life. Actually, I would say it's really a religion to explain life without God. And you know, when our public schools have, by and large, thrown God out, the Bible out, prayer out, they say they've thrown religion out, but they haven't. They threw Christianity out and have replaced it with the religion of naturalism. Because what Darwinian evolution is all about is ultimately naturalism, and naturalism is atheism.
Darwinism provides some of the facts that we have to acknowledge, facts about human nature, facts about the origin of life. But no, it's not. That's not what it's a theory of.
But from an atheist materialist point of view, it's certainly the place we start.
Well, it's the place that we start in asking the question of how we came to be, why we have brains, why we have bodies, what life consists of. But it is not and doesn't claim to be a justification for morality.
Well, it doesn't now. I think, again, that's important to emphasize.
Pope Francis recently spoke some of his boldest words yet against abortion, and a popular leader in the new atheist movement is not happy about it. Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, writer, and often referred to as the most famous atheist in the world, tweeted out this message early last week. And you thought Francis was the good pope. Abortion to avoid birth defects is not about eugenics. It's about the avoidance of individual human suffering.
The rise of social Darwinism, which stressed the survival of the fittest, came to full fruition in the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. It even impacted who would be allowed to be born through the acceptance of eugenics, meaning, technically, good birth.
Planned Parenthood became the foot soldiers of the eugenics movement.
Planned Parenthood bought into the evolutionary worldview, and as a result, millions of preborn babies have been killed.
Mrs. Margaret Slee, president of America's Planned Parenthood Federation, maintains that European women should stop having babies for the next 10 years.
What about the women who want babies now and in 10 years will not be able to have babies? Rather impractical, don't you think?
Oh, John, you do ask hard questions. I should think that instead of being impractical, it is really very practical and intelligent and humane.
Having babies is the only thing left which is both unrationed and untaxed. Do you think we really ought to stop?
But from my view, I believe that there should be no more babies.
I told you. You'd die for that. You should have gone for the head.
Bright eyes. Show him. Go ahead, do your trick. Speak. There. Can you believe it?
Yes, amusing. A man acting like an ape.
Now, Margaret Sanger often gets a bad rap because she talks about improving the race and people think it's a racist thing, meaning whites versus black. She means the human race.
But what people don't understand, if you read the Turner Diaries, it plainly says it, that if you get the law, that's the last line of defense between us and communism. If you get rid of law enforcement, then that gives them, the communists, an open door to come in and take over. And I got a 19-year-old daughter. Her age, around that age, is going to be the worst The worst. I don't know what this country's going to become because they're freeloaders. They don't want to work. All they want to do is smoke dope. They don't want to work. They don't want to do right. And and I try to instill that in my daughter. And I try to tell my daughter, that is going to be the worst generation ever. That generation is going to be. We're fucked. I mean, this country's fucked. But that's where the Ku Klux Klan is going to come in and say we're not going to have it. The goal of the Ku Klux Klan is for the advancement of the white race. I'm not a bigot, but I'm a white separatist. I'm not a white supremacist. I don't consider my race superior. But we have to have organizations like the Ku Klux Klan to instill the children and the people that want to join, to teach them that there's a greater cause. Most people that judge me for being in the Ku Klux Klan and hate me for being in the Ku Klux Klan, there's an underlining reason for that. They're gay, they're homosexual, they're a race mixer, something like that. And there's a lot of white people there, but they're liberal-minded. They have no idea. But I don't judge anybody. I give anybody a chance. But if you want to judge me and say, hey, this is that's wrong for the Ku Klux Klan, then I'm going to judge you. Because you're giving me an open door to judge you.
Planned Parenthood of Greater New York is removing the name of Margaret Sanger, a founder of the national organization, from its Manhattan clinic. The abortion provider says it made the decision because of Sanger's, quote, harmful connections to the eugenics movement. Quote, the next step for Planned Parenthood is recognizing that Margaret Sanger's racist legacy continues today, as abortion continues to disproportionately impact minority communities, especially the black community.
Did you hear what I said, Forrest? You're the same as everybody else. You are no different.
You look at the number of black babies that are being aborted. Do those lives matter? I think they matter a lot. Maybe I'm not objective when it comes to Planned Parenthood, but I know who Margaret Sanger is. And I know that she believed in eugenics and that she was not particularly enamored with black people. And one of the reasons that you find most of their clinics in black neighborhoods is so that you can find a way to control that population. And I think people should go back and read about Margaret Sanger, who founded this place, a woman who Hillary Clinton, by the way, says that she admires. Look and see what many people in Nazi Germany thought about her.
13 women in India recently died after going through government-sanctioned sterilization surgery. This is the latest tragedy in India's ongoing war against population control, and yes, it is as bad as it sounds. India is currently on pace to become the most populated country in the world by 2030. So in order to control the population, the government has come up with a plan to sterilize a number of citizens, and that is a very specific number. India has been accused of enforcing sterilization quotas. They officially ended their federal quota program in 1996, but there are accusations that that quota system is still in place.
Abortion has been in the news a lot. Some of the most restrictive abortion laws in recent history, have been passed. Alabama and also Missouri. I guess Missouri right now is trying to close down its only abortion clinic. It befuddles me that these decisions about a woman's right to reproduce, often, whether a woman has a right to reproduce or say what she's going to do with her body, that men and people who have no ability to reproduce are always the one making the decision. And they are so disruptive and so hypocritical. Like a lot of laws are passed where a rapist or a person who commits incest gets a lighter sentence than a doctor who performs an abortion.
The right to abortion is not a real right. My bodily autonomy doesn't give me license to kill, period. We have to change the way we look at this entirely and get that message to everyone.
Popular narrative has been that abortion is somehow going to empower women when we know that it's an act of violence against our children.
People that claim to be feminists and people that claim to be pro-women but are out there advocating for abortion, they're still stuck in this very antiquated view that abortion equals women's empowerment. We're publishing content every day to millions of people, content that exposes what abortion is. We're using undercover cameras. And I'm posing as a 13-year-old girl named Brianna. I tell the Planned Parenthood worker that I have a 31-year-old boyfriend. I remember watching the view count of the YouTube videos start to skyrocket.
a pro-life group staged an undercover sting at Planned Parenthood, and the results are shocking.
Lila Rose has been a huge pain in the side of Planned Parenthood, and I think that they view her, along with other pro-life activists, as being a huge threat to women.
What would be, in a sentence, the mission statement of the Satanic Temple?
For the Satanic Temple is that we're a non-theistic religion in opposition to arbitrary authority, and we grew up in a Judeo-Christian culture, and we began to question some of the superstitious norms that were being imposed upon us.
The Satanic Temple is an activist organization of self-identified Satanists.
We're so used to the theocratic agenda being pushed forward in bills and legislation. It's become a fact of life in the American culture right now.
We empower women to be creative about protecting their own freedoms and access to reproductive health.
In 2015, the group filed a lawsuit seeking exemption from recently introduced abortion laws in Missouri on the grounds of religious freedom.
If we're asking for religious rights for all, that means religious rights for Satanists as well. No way that we can come there and have a logical discussion or argument.
God, cast into hell, Satan, and all the evil spirits.
By 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had taken control of Germany, and this began a period of racial hygiene laws, persecution, and death camps. Hitler wanted to create the master race and eliminate Jews and other people he considered inferior to the Aryan race. Innocent children and concentration camp prisoners suffered through horrific medical experiments. All of this was accomplished with the assistance of German doctors and nurses.
Your boy's different, Ms. Gump. His IQ's 75.
Well, we're all different, Mr. Hancock.
The basis for Hitler's plan of racial hygiene was a concept called eugenics, which is the pseudoscience of developing a superior race.
The state requires a minimum IQ of 80 to attend public school, Mrs. Gump. He's gonna have to go to special school.
What does normal mean anyway? He might be a bit on the slow side. But my boy Forrest is gonna get the same opportunities as everyone else. He's not going to some special school. There must be something can be done.
Is that Mr. Gump? Mrs. Gump?
He's on vacation.
Some of these eugenic healthcare policies were developed in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These U.S. policies were emulated by Germany and incorporated into the governing philosophy of applied biology.
There were laws on the book in Virginia that said that you could sterilize people, and the Nazis took their 1933 sterilization law and mimicked it after the U.S. law.
Hitler convinced the German people that the Jews were their enemy and the cause of their problems. He then created an atmosphere of racial intolerance and hatred of people deemed to be racially inferior. All of this would lead to an appalling era in world history called the Holocaust, a period of persecution and mass murder.
When the boy was born, like old Spartans, he was inspected. If he'd been small or puny, he would have been discarded. He was baptized in the fire of combat. As is customary in Sparta, the boy was taken from his mother and plunged into a world of violence. Forces the boy to fight. Forces them to steal, to kill.
Your mama sure does care about your schooling, son.
If we can't get them out, we'll breed them out.
You don't say much, do you?
In 1916, Sanger opened the country's first birth control clinic. As a member of the American Eugenics Society, she advocated improving the genetic composition of humans through controlled reproduction of different races and classes. In 1919, writing,
I personally believe in the sterilization of the feeble-minded, the insane, and the syphilitic. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the over-fertility of the mentally and physically defective.
In 1933, the Nazi government passed the Nuremberg Laws for the protection of hereditary health. This legalized involuntary sterilization. Germany's sterilization laws led to the involuntary sterilization by doctors of about 400,000 Germans. Nazi doctors sterilized citizens against their will, euthanized 200,000 disabled German children and adults, and created the gas chambers and crematoria that were used for the mass murder of 6 million Jews, Poles, and Gypsies. Without the full support of physicians, scientists, and nurses, the Holocaust, as it unfolded, could never have happened.
Oh, she's got to take it down! I told her it's barracks at the fucking Hotel Europa! Fucking Jew bitch engineer! You fucking bitch!
Herr Kommandant, the entire foundation has to be torn down and repoured. If not, there will be at least a subsidence at the southern end of the barracks. Subsidence and then collapse.
You are an engineer?
Yes.
Unterscharführer.
Jawohl.
Shoot her.
Herr Kommandant, I'm only trying to do my job.
Yeah, I'm doing mine.
Sir, she's foreman of construction.
We're not going to have... Oh, shoot her! Here, on my authority.
Like more than that.
I'm sure you're right.
Christensen, any of your men speak German?
No, sir.
I need lead guy. Lead guy! Limpton, find me lead guy.
Yes, sir. Dick?
Pure Aryan Germans could be recognized from their blonde hair and blue eyes. It was all a fantasy, but the fantasy was dressed up as science. Germans were being taught to think of other races as somehow less than perfect. With the Nuremberg decrees, this discrimination was set down in stone.
Have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born.
I was trying to take the place of my mother, and I resented that. So she would punish me or do things to me that would aggravate me. So once she did something to me, I'd do something back, and pretty soon it just got out of hand.
It was just before his 12th birthday. Do you think she had any appreciation of what a lobotomy would do?
I don't know that she cared. And whatever that solution brought, she was willing to accept.
This picture shows Howard undergoing his lobotomy.
I wasn't changed that much, and I still had my faculties. I thought she was going to get more of a docile, robotic type kid that she could control.
I will perform transorbital lobotomy on 10 patients within an hour.
In the 1930s, a new brain surgery, like the one portrayed here in the movie Francis, was brought to the United States, the lobotomy.
Only a little more dangerous than operating to remove an infected tooth.
It was performed on mentally ill patients all over the country.
Lobotomy gets them home.
Hailed by the media as a miracle cure.
Life magazine, the New York Times, Time magazine, they loved it.
Lobotomy was felt to be mainstream science. It wins the Nobel Prize.
But more than 40,000 surgeries later, the brutal truth about lobotomy would come to light.
They were basically going in and mushing around brain tissue, and unfortunately, in many cases, leaving patients worse off.
In 1941, Joseph P. Kennedy, the patriarch of that prominent political family, read about the surgery and contacted Freeman and Watts about his eldest daughter, Rosemary.
Being at the table, she wasn't up to the complicated conversation we'd have of the political discussions.
In her early 20s, her mental health issues were really becoming a problem. The tragedy is many other doctors at the time recommended against this procedure. They agreed that it was too experimental.
But at the age of 23, Rosemary Kennedy was lobotomized. The surgery did not go well.
And Rosemary became disabled.
When he does talk, it's usually about being the target of government conspiracies.
I think the main one of that is the darn Federal Bureau of Investigation. They come out there with their darn battery-operated mind control radiation.
And then on July 1st, 1953, doctors from the Veterans Administration put him under and gave him a lobotomy.
You see these scars here, don't you? That's what they were. The frontal lobe or something, I don't know, they cut off, I don't know why. Oh, when I first got it looked terrible, for Christ's sake. Looked like somebody shot the darn shotgun.
Digging through government records and interviewing families, the Wall Street Journal has found that the Veterans Administration lobotomized hundreds of World War II vets who had returned from overseas with serious psychiatric conditions.
It sounds like a old darn Grimm's fairy tale, only it's not a fairy tale. It's true.
He's gone. It was so simple. I'm way more focused. And I'm feeling 100%. The Adderall is working, and fuck if this drug doesn't feel good. It'll just be me and you, my friend. Maybe I'll read to you, or we'll just talk. You're not buying any of this either, are you?
I don't like this, bro.
It was feeling good for a few days. It really was. But this is the 5th day of not sleeping. Isn't that a funny word?
Imagining, for example, how difficult it is for a very active 6-year-old, especially if they're male, to sit quietly and regulate themselves by the bell for 6 or 7 hours, when they first go to grade 1. And the fact that, Freud would say, if he was alive, that the reason that so many people have attention deficit disorder is because if you define pathology as being unable to sit down and pay attention to things that are deadly boring while you should be running around playing and having fun and wearing yourself to a frazzle, then that's pathology. That's attention deficit disorder. And you can treat it with Ritalin, but that's only because you can treat anybody with Ritalin. Ritalin is an amphetamine, and it makes you focus more on whatever you happen to be focused on, though there's no real evidence that it provides any boost in academic achievement over any reasonable amount of time. Attention deficit disorder is a perfect example of that. And then the pathology is defined by the circumstance. If we didn't have schools that are like the schools we have, we wouldn't have attention deficit disorder as a pathology. Now, in people, open extroverted kids, because they're not going to sit down and shut up because they can't. They're extremely curious, and mostly what they want to do is talk to everyone and play. You can also inhibit their tendency to play using Ritalin. So it's pretty sad. In fact, it's appalling, really.
What we
know as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or some people still call it ADD, attention deficit disorder, has been recognized by some doctors since way back in 1902. But from 1902 until 1980, it was all about little boys who couldn't sit still, couldn't shut up, and were driving everybody nuts. It was just behavior problems. And we've also learned that there are many people who have ADHD who've never had any significant behavior problems. And that even for those who have, that's usually the least of it. It's the attention problems that tend to make more trouble for people, particularly as they get a little bit older and more is expected of them for being able to manage themselves. That ADHD has nothing to do with how smart a person is.
Now, can you believe it? After only 5 years of playing football, I got a college degree.
Congratulations, son.
Forrest, I'm so proud of you. Here, I'll hold this for you.
Congratulations, son. Have you given any thought to your future?
Thought? Hello, I'm Forrest Gump.
How many gives a husky shit who you are, pussball? You're not even a low-life scum-sucking maggot. Get your faggoty ass on the bus, you're in the army now.
At first, it seemed like I made a mistake. Now, for some reason, I fit in the army like one of them round pegs. It's not really hard. You just make your bed real neat and remember to stand up straight and always answer every question with, "Yes, drill sergeant."
Is that clear? Yes, drill sergeant!
This is something central to a woman's life, to her dignity. It's a decision that she must make for herself. And when government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than a fully adult human responsible for her own choice.
Is Roe a super precedent?
How would you define super precedent? Well, people use super precedent differently, was to define cases that are so well settled that no political actors and no people seriously push for their overruling. And I'm answering a lot of questions about Roe, which I think indicates that Roe doesn't fall in that category.
Sterilization laws were widespread in the U.S., most notably in Indiana and North Carolina. But other states, including California and Virginia, allowed sterilization even into the 1970s. In fact, in the early 20th century, the U.S. led the world in compulsory sterilizations.
A very famous law was passed in Virginia that said it was okay to sterilize the retarded. And it was brought before the Supreme Court, and Oliver Wendell Holmes said 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, saying that it was okay to sterilize.
Will you marry me? But you won't marry me. Why don't you love me, Jenny? I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
You win, Jerry. You win! No amount of genius can stop your dumb, mediocre, vacuous roots from digging into everything and everyone around you and draining them of any ability to fend you off.
So, is being brilliant just the curse of becoming aware of everything that's wrong without having any power to change it? What is the value of smarts in a society that kind of hates smart people? Am I evil?
Worse, you're smart.
Hitler promised the German people they were creating the master race.
Like when Hitler first came to power, he put in a lot of public health initiatives, including mass tuberculosis screening, which actually turned out to be a good thing. And at the same time, he went on a beautify the factories campaign. And so he convinced the German factory owners to increase the levels of hygiene in the factories, to get rid of the rats and the mice, to plant flowers out front, to make everything look neat and orderly. And the insecticide they used was Zyklon. Well, Zyklon, to eradicate the rats and the insects, Zyklon, a slightly different formulation, was the gas that was used in the concentration camps. And so Hitler went from cleaning up the rats and the mice in the factories and the insects, and then he went into the mental hospitals and started cleaning up in there, and then it just went broader and broader, again, sort of one step at a time.
That's right. If you come to Texas and kill somebody, we will kill you back. That's our policy. If more than 3 people saw you do what you did, you don't sit on death row for 15 years, Jack. You go straight to the front of the line.
Over the past 35 years, China has attempted to keep its booming population in check by instituting a one-child-per-family policy. Many have argued that population control methods create more problems than they solve. Is China's one-child policy a failure?
The year was 1966, and Mao Zedong and his Communist Party were starting to worry. The country had recovered from famine, but the population growth rate was soaring, and the economy was stagnating, and the question of how to feed extra mouths was pressing. By 1978, and from 1980 through 2015, China implemented what is known today as the one-child policy. China's population is still growing, but all too soon it'll begin to shrink. Many sisterless and brotherless men and women will only have parents, grandparents, and children. No uncles, no aunts, no cousins. What's missing is family.
Family serves as the main social safety net, especially for rural residents. The PRC is also a low-trust society, which is partly a legacy of the Cultural Revolution and the overwhelming surveillance state now being created.
Almost no one adopted Chinese boys because only girls are rejected. The result in China was adoption, abortion, and at worst, murder. But that now, there aren't enough girls. Girls who grow to be women to marry, women to have kids, women to balance society.
158 is a silicon doll created because China is facing a shortage of women. The dolls are churned out at this factory in the country's northwest.
There are far too many men in China compared to the number of women. It's a great business opportunity. There are more and more single men who cannot find a wife and are desperate. So we've decided to make life-size dolls for them. These men are happy to pay the price.
In 8 AD, Ovid wrote Metamorphosis, a myth involving a woman named Galatea, sculpted from ivory. Her owner became obsessed with her, bathing her, feeding her, and of course, sleeping with her. And eventually, Aphrodite made her into a real woman. For centuries, sex dolls remained an illicit secret until they were first advertised in porn magazines in 1968. The dolls are high-end and anatomically correct and used for sex and companionship. I made it my mission to experience the first male doll. It feels like a real person who can't respond to you. I would not be able to tell if this was a real dick or not. It feels absolutely indistinguishable from a real person. Left to my own devices, I like having sex with him and really be lost in my own fantasy.
There's a reason that Karl Marx abhorred the traditional family. Let's just say that. He saw it as a capitalist institution based on capital and on private gain. He openly called for abolition of the family.
There's no afterlife. Everything just goes black.
All you have to do is know the difference between good and bad and root for good.
Rick says good and bad are artificial constructs.
Yeah, well, I get the feeling he kind of needs that to be the case.
Donald has said he's in favor of defunding Planned Parenthood. He even supported shutting the government down to defund Planned Parenthood.
You know, Obama's committed to his principles, his liberal principles. He will fight for them. He says, I will veto any budget that doesn't fund Planned Parenthood, and Republicans surrender. We need to stop surrendering and start standing for our principles.
Throughout Planned Parenthood's history, you've helped women and their families make their own choices about health and family planning. Last year alone, you provided 1.5 million cancer screenings and helped 2.2 million people access birth control. And yet over the past year, you've had to stand up to politicians who want to deny millions of women the care they rely on and inject themselves into decisions that are best made between a woman and her doctor.
Should the law be on abortion?
Well, I have been pro-life.
I know. What should the law? I know your principle. That's a good value, but what should be the law?
This presidential election is going to be very important because when you say what's the law, nobody knows what the law is going to be. It depends on who gets elected because somebody's going to appoint conservative judges and somebody's going to appoint liberal judges depending on who wins.
I've never understood the pro-life position.
Well,
I never understood it because I
to defund Planned Parenthood despite a veto promise from President Obama. But is risking a government shutdown over Planned Parenthood good politics?
So shutting down government and everything that comes with it is a Trojan horse that the Democrats and others are marching into this presidential campaign, which is the real attack on human life that we saw in these tapes that Carly Fiorina and others have certainly commented on and very passionately.
Okay.
Because you have said that Planned Parenthood, they do some good things, you say.
People that are Republicans, like myself, think it's disgusting, some of the tapes that came out and some of the views. Now, you know, they're fighting it, Planned Parenthood is fighting it, but if you look at what's going on with those tapes, anybody that watches those tapes cannot be a fan of Planned Parenthood.
Today, an anti-abortion group released a fourth undercover video that it says shows Planned Parenthood doctors discussing how to distribute the body parts of fetuses for research.
The latest sting video is also the most graphic. It shows a Planned Parenthood doctor in Colorado examining a fetus and isolating different organs.
I think the per item thing works a little better just because we can see how much we can get out of it.
The videos have galvanized Republicans who introduced Senate legislation today.
A bill to prohibit federal funding of Planned Parenthood Federation of America.
This is how a human gets made. Every one of us started out this way. We've a pretty good idea what happens over the 9 months it takes to produce a newborn. But there's this one bit that's been missing. Right at the beginning, before this animation even starts. The very first few weeks.
Anyone who has watched this videotape, I dare Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama to watch these tapes. Watch a fully formed fetus on the table, its heart beating, its legs kicking, while someone says we have to keep it alive to harvest its brain.
Any reaction to the Republican attempt to defund Planned Parenthood?
It's another effort by the Republicans to, try to limit the health care options for women, and we should, not let them succeed once again.
I've been going to Planned Parenthood for 27 years for birth control and well woman checks, and I still go to Planned Parenthood today.
I stand with Planned Parenthood because they're always here for me, because they care.
But today, politicians are taking away our access to abortion. This isn't right. Every woman should be able to make the decision for herself on whether to choose adoption, end a pregnancy, or raise a child with the counsel of her healthcare provider. I stand with Planned Parenthood because they're always here for me.
I will defend Planned Parenthood. I will defend Roe v. Wade, and I will defend women's rights to make their own health care decisions. He said women should be punished, that there should be some...
Virginia's governor says he has no regrets on his comments earlier this week defending abortion, even as a baby is being born.
This is infanticide that we're talking about.
Republican Ben Sasse blasts Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia for supporting a bill in his state that would have allowed abortion up until and during birth.
We're talking about a little baby girl who's been born and is on a table in a hospital or a medical facility, and then a decision or a debate would be had about whether or not you could kill that little baby.
Organs, bones, and other body parts of aborted babies are being sold and transplanted into lab animals. No, this is not a passage out of Frankenstein. These are real experiments happening now that taxpayers are funding. Last year, the National Institutes of Health funded 200 similar studies across 50 institutions, mostly universities, in 33 states. This year, the NIH estimates it will spend $120 million tax dollars on research using aborted baby parts.
But this is a crisis now. This problem is growing in spite of Republicans, Democrats, pro-lifers, animal advocates. Nobody wants this.
Here's what Virginia's governor did say.
The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mothers.
Now, Senator Sasse is fast-tracking his bill to protect children who survive abortions.
Everyone in the Senate ought to be able to say unequivocally that killing that little baby is wrong. This doesn't take any political courage.
Human chimeras living among us, it's only science fiction for right now. Chimeric research is a Pandora's box, that's obviously from hell, that should not be opened. Yesterday, the Senate passed the Endless Frontier Act, a bill that commits nearly $250 billion to promote emerging technologies so that America can keep pace with Chinese innovation.
You're clones. You're copies of people out here in the world.
What?
Clones.
What?
Copies? What are you talking
Why?
about?
Some hag trophy wife needs new skin for a facelift, or one of them gets sick and they need a new heart. They take it from you.
In front of China's consulate, practitioners of Falun Gong accuse the Chinese government of forcibly harvesting the organs of the spiritual group's prisoners. Zheng Zheng speaks about her experience after her arrest.
On the day while we were transferred from the detention center to the labor camp, the person we saw, to our surprise, was not the police guard, but a doctor. We were first taken to an unknown place where a doctor was waiting for us and to integrate us about our medical history.
The majority of the organs are all coming from Falun Gong practitioners.
Let's clean that drip.
What's his blood pressure?
BP 138/92.
I have seen at least 3 children had a scar on their body, indicates the organ had been stolen. And in 1995, it comes to my turn to do it. It was a Wednesday, 9:30 next day, we met at the hospital gate and headed towards the Western Mountain execution ground. After gunshots were heard, we rushed in, where I can see a civilian-clothed man lying on the ground with a single bullet wound to his right chest. My chief surgeons then ordered and guided me, extracted the liver and 2 kidneys. The man was alive. He tried to resist my scalpel cut, but too weak to avoid my action. But I didn't feel guilty. In fact, I didn't feel anything but like a full programmed robot doing its task. I thought I was carrying my duty to eliminate the enemy of the state.
2009, he has a liver transplant.
Yeah, by early 2009, he is wasting away. And he really realizes that he has maybe 3 or 4 months before the liver will give out totally. And his wife, and she realizes that in California, he's not going to make it. He's not going to get a liver by May or June. But one thing you can do is you can list in different states. And he's able by May or June to get near the top of the list in Tennessee.
I mean, it was sort of a secret liver transplant.
Yeah, secrecy served him well in a way. He would keep new products secret, and suddenly there'd be these great launch events.
As some of you may know, about 5 months ago, I had a liver transplant. So I now have the liver of a mid-20s person who died in a car crash and was generous enough to donate their organs. And I wouldn't be here without such generosity. So thank you guys. Let's give them a round of applause.
And so when I was finished with True Lies, I remember the doctor that physical said, you know, the time is coming up where I see your heart, the performance going down, that you need soon a valve replacement. I went into the hospital and got the valve replacement, got both valves replaced, the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve.
In this year's annual letter, as we make the world healthier, is the population going to get so big that feeding everybody and maintaining the environment is going to be impossible. We go from less than 1 billion in 1800, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.4 billion where we are today is happening even faster. What we found out is that as health improves, families choose to have less children. And this effect is very, very dramatic. These vaccines will allow us to save millions of lives. To achieve this goal of global elimination, we need 3 things: the capacity to produce billions of vaccines, the funding to pay for them, and the systems to deliver them everywhere. The world's low and lower middle income countries are home to nearly half of the global population. Because they don't have the purchasing power of the wealthy countries, they risk not getting nearly enough doses. Unless we do better, they'll only be able to cover 14% of their people with a COVID-19 vaccine. A vaccine can make COVID-19 a preventable disease, and no one should die of a preventable disease simply because the country they live in can't afford the vaccine. And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. This equation has 4 factors. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
The co-founder of Microsoft has spent the last few decades focused through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on improving global health, including reducing the spread of infectious diseases.
Yeah, sadly, it seems likely at this point that even though the deaths in the developing world have been very small as yet, because not that many people with the disease went there, as moved around in between rich countries. Sadly, I do think that most of the deaths will be in those countries and the most extreme economic pain. They're not able to borrow, 10, 20% of GDP, which many of the rich countries are engaged in that exercise. They just don't have the credit worthiness, the sense that that'll drive hyperinflation would be very strong. So
don't need a mask. The mask is about compliance because they know Canadians like to do what they're told. So if they tell you have to wear a mask, next they're going to tell you have to contact trace. Then they're going to tell you have to take the vaccine. And because Canadians like to do what they're told, they're hoping that everyone just complies. And then guess what, kids? Once you take your vaccine, like a dumb person that doesn't know any better, they're going to tell you, sorry, the vaccine isn't as effective as we thought it was going to be. So now you still got to wear your mask, still got to get contact trace, still have all the restrictions and social distancing, and still take your vaccine. And then what did you get out of all of this? You got a whole year where you weren't allowed to travel, your business was closed, they took your rights and freedoms, they forced a vaccine on you, and what happened? The same amount of people died, everything is the exact same, and now they're going to put you back on lockdown and bring it all the way till July of next year so they can do the same thing again. Bring you from July, August, and September, getting you off lockdown, but just to bring you back on lockdown again. If you idiots haven't figured it out yet, it's a perpetual cycle that you never get out of. And it's a way to take your rights, your freedoms, close your business, take your wealth. Why? So you become dependent on government. Why? If you're independent, the government works for you like it's supposed to. If you depend on the government to give you a paycheck to feed your family every month because they closed your business on you, now the government doesn't work for you, the government rules you. So instead of a middle class, we have the government, upper class, and the lower class dependents that rely on the government to survive. In other words, we have a slave class.
Saw the exact same, a lot of people saw it. There was a UN document, this is common knowledge, and it basically outlined the lockdowns, and they just gave it to each country and allowed each country to tweak it for their own people, to make it more palpable for their people, and to give the impression that it wasn't an international document disseminated to all countries to make it people think that every country made up their own rules. No. The 5 levels of lockdown were in there. In a place like Ireland, they went level 1 to 5. In a place like Canada, where we like colors, now we got green to gray. It's still 5 levels of lockdown. All the 5 levels are identical. They used Australia as the model for the 5th level of lockdown, where you can't leave your house, you can't go can't literally do anything. And that's what they really want to do here, is because they want to convince you to accept the vaccine passport. I want to stress that. Everything that they're doing, closing your business, closing your gym, forcing you to wear a mask, all the stuff they're doing is to try to convince you that it's a good idea for you to go along with this idea of a vaccine passport so they can vaccinate you multiple times a year, every year, and then use that as an excuse to prevent you from travel, work, congregating, etc., etc., etc.
On the falsification of
a vaccination card. That's actually a serious offense, falsifying an official document. That literally could result in prison time as much as 7 years. The vaccination card's a pretty sacred document to tell us who's vaccinated, who's not. Our goal here, Elizabeth, is not to penalize restaurants and indoor entertainment, fitness, to educate for a month, get everyone clear about what they need to do, and just make sure people do it. If we get non-compliance after that much education and that much of a grace period, we won't hesitate to give penalties. It's an escalator approach to make clear that people have to conform with the law.
Have begun patrolling the streets of Australia's largest city, Sydney, to help enforce a prolonged lockdown. 300 soldiers have been deployed to assist New South Wales police and ensuring those who test positive comply with isolation orders.
What you've got with the Defence Force is a disciplined, capable organisation that's vaccinated, that's tested, and it's compliant, and it's able to do a range of tasks that will take the pressure off the police, take the pressure off the Department of Health and other organisations so they can get out and do what they do best.
We want freedom! 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 We want freedom!
Tonight in France, the fight over who needs to get vaccinated hitting the streets. Demonstrators in Paris pelting police who respond with tear gas and fists. At least 3 officers were injured, nearly 20 protesters were arrested. They claim the choice to get vaccinated should be about liberté, freedom.
We have a choice in this free country! This is America, isn't it?
Taking to the streets in protest, some healthcare workers speaking out against the state of California's new order that all who work in healthcare be vaccinated against COVID-19 by September 30th, with exemptions, of course, for medical or religious reasons. With a group that calls itself America's Healthcare Workers for Medical Freedom. The protests, though, come at a time when pediatricians across the country, including right here in Orange County, and that hospital joins a slew of hospitals across the country, along with public agencies that are now mandating their employees be vaccinated against the virus. The protest here scheduled to start at 8 a.m. Reporting live this morning in Orange County, I'm Gigi Graciette. Back to you.
All right, Gigi, thank you.
Bill de Blasio, when asked about mandatory vaccination, said, "We tried voluntary. The voluntary phase is over." That is to say, de Blasio says that in the public sector, everybody working for the city has to be vaccinated. He also said he's talking to the private sector, telling them to go as far as possible to mandate vaccines. And
on to a medical story that has created some amount of a public health panic in India after traces of a polio virus, a particular strain that is known to have been eradicated from India, were found in some batches of an oral polio vaccine. This was
And the probe into the death of 4 infants following a measles vaccination near Lucknow is underway. A central team met the families of the infants to piece together all information, and vaccine samples have been sent to the Kolkata's drug laboratory for testing.
Sarita's daughter was among the 4 children who died on Saturday soon after receiving a measles vaccine at the local Anganwadi. The painful flashback was too much for Sarita.
Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates is increasing his foundation's commitment to eradicating polio. At last week's World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland, Gates pledged more money to a global effort that appears close to eliminating the disease.
Oh, I should mention that our foundation is adding $100 million today to the polio campaign, and that's to help close the gap.
This is what they're trying to stop. While many completely recover from polio, in some it spreads to the spinal cord or brain, leading to partial or complete paralysis. It's a disease that disables more often than it kills. Globally, around 10 million people are estimated to live with the effects. In addition to his foundation's monetary pledge, Gates also appears in a new campaign for Rotary International.
We are this close. We are this close to ending polio.
Rotary members have raised more than $1 billion to fight polio.
These women have two things in common. They are HIV positive, and they say they were sterilized without their consent. Rhoda Musau is 40, childless and infertile. Her first child died young, and her second was stillborn. She was still recovering when her husband told the doctor to sterilize her.
The doctor told me they were cleaning my stomach. I don't know what happened. I just don't know. I learned about what happened 6 months later.
The women accused some doctors in government hospitals and others in hospitals run by aid agencies of performing unauthorized sterilizations. She says that there was no consent, women were misinformed, or sterilization was set as a condition for receiving free or discounted antiretroviral drugs and milk formula. She also says the practice goes back 2 decades, so many more women could have been affected.
The issue of sterilization has brought double stigma for the women. Remember, we are living with HIV. Then the issue of not being able to give birth. And this is Africa, where a woman who is not able to give birth, and again you are HIV positive, then you are no longer a woman.
Begin tonight with a row that now threatens to derail the government's ongoing tetanus vaccination.
Yes, the Catholic Church has stepped up its opposition to the exercise, dismissing it as a population control tool.
Doctors allied to the Catholic Church in Kenya are now warning women of reproductive age against taking the vaccine, saying it could render them sterile.
The Catholic Church advises all Kenyans not to participate in the vaccination program.
The Conference of Catholic Bishops claim the vaccine is linked to cells derived from aborted fetal tissue, and that raises moral concerns because of the Church's opposition to abortion. Johnson & Johnson says there is no fetal tissue in its vaccine and that it's used an engineered cell line. NBC News says those cells are generally replicated from original cells taken 4 decades ago from fetal tissue. In a statement, the bishops write, in part, if one has the ability to choose a vaccine, Pfizer or Moderna's vaccines should be chosen over Johnson & Johnson's. We saw Rogan say
imperfect vaccination can enhance the transmission of highly virulent pathogens.
Right.
So this is a scientific paper from 2015 that shows here's one important quote: vaccines that keep the host alive but still allow transmission can thus allow virulent strains to circulate in a population.
Scientifically, we saw experts saying that take is beyond wrong. People saying that Rogan is misunderstanding, misleading, cherry-picking studies in a field that he has no actual background in. Rogan is completely wrong trying to deduce anything else. A number of experts going further and saying that's not the only thing that Rogan got wrong on the podcast regarding COVID-19. For example, you also had Rogan saying,
we've shown this is a fact. Just a couple of months ago, the idea of a breakthrough case was unheard of. Nobody heard of anybody catching COVID that had a vaccine, right? That was the whole idea. You get a vaccine, you don't have to worry about it. Now we know not only do you get it, but you can spread it.
But for anyone that's been paying attention, you know that is absolutely not a fact.
So this week, renewed interest in whether serial pedophile Jeffrey Epstein killed himself in prison or whether he was offed by somebody who wanted him dead. A lot of people may fall into that category, given the number of high-profile people who partied with and may have partaken in his obsession with underage girls who say that they were sex slaves in his bizarre world. Then this video surfaces from Project Veritas in which ABC anchor Amy Robach says that ABC, quote, quashed her exclusive with Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre, who said that she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew when she was 17.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. Do I think he was killed? 100%. Yes, I do. Because he made his whole living blackmailing people. There were a lot of men in those planes, a lot of men who visited that island, a lot of powerful men who came into that apartment.
Jeffrey Epstein may be dead, but this story isn't. A shocking new report from the New York Times sheds light on the connection between Microsoft founder Bill Gates and the late Jeffrey Epstein. After Gates' name came up in connection with Epstein and MIT Media Lab, Gates gave a statement to the Wall Street Journal where he insisted he did not have any business relationship or friendship with Epstein. But new reporting from the New York Times outlines numerous meetings between Gates and Epstein and a conversation with Bill and Melinda Gates' foundation, a connection between their foundation and JP Morgan to set up a charitable fund that would financially benefit Epstein. You know what I want to know? Why? You report these two men met at least 6 times.
Well, I believe that there were more. And visits to the mansion, seeing each other in Seattle, flying on Epstein's plane, when we all know Bill Gates has his own $40 million plane. And then, as an investigative reporter, why would Gates say, oh, I had no relationship with him? Well,
what's the explanation?
Not only does he have the world's largest charitable foundation, but one of their primary missions is to help young women in underprivileged countries. Jeffrey Epstein was preying on young women from Eastern Europe, from South Africa, luring them into his web. And it's the antithesis of what the Gates Foundation stands for.
And what is the Gates explanation for this?
That it was all about philanthropy, that Bill Gates just wanted to find new sources of money.
Bill, the founder and CEO, Melinda worked in product development.
I was new to Microsoft. There were a lot of men there. And, you know, you're still looking around.
And now questions are arising whether Bill Gates' contact with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein may have played a role.
It seems that Melinda and Bill Gates actually met with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2013. That's according
Gates emailing colleagues in 2011, his lifestyle is very different and kind of intriguing, although it would not work for me.
Bill Gates, the billionaire, is speaking out for the first time about his divorce, commenting on his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, calling it a huge mistake.
Gates telling CNN the couple who announced the end of their 27-year marriage in May. According to the Wall Street Journal, it was Bill's relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein that may have first pushed Melinda to hire divorce attorneys.
Obviously, in May, you and your wife, Melinda, announced you were ending your marriage after 27 years. On Monday, this week, the divorce was finalized. Just on a personal level, how are you doing? The New York Times and Wall Street Journal both reported in recent months that Melinda was concerned about a relationship you had with Jeffrey Epstein, who at the time you met him in 2011 had been already convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor. Can you explain your relationship with Epstein?
Had several dinners with him, hoping that what he said about getting billions of philanthropy for global health through contacts that he had might emerge. When it looked like that wasn't a real thing, that relationship ended. But it was a huge mistake to spend time with him, to give him the credibility of being there. There were lots of others in that same situation, but I made a mistake.
We have ABC Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Jen Ashton here with me, and 143 million confirmed cases of coronavirus worldwide, and there is some new information about pregnant women. Just yesterday, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine issued a bold statement. They are saying that pregnant women and those seeking to become pregnant should get a COVID-19 vaccine. They are not mincing words here. They're not saying it's an option. They are recommending it.
So today I want to talk about my experience with birth control, specifically the birth control that I'm on, which is called Depo. Depo is a shot that, depending on you, I get every 3 months, which started off really positive and has sharply spiraled into something so horrifyingly negative. After about a year, the side effects became very prevalent in my life and started to affect me socially, emotionally, physically.
Well, the pledge is to get 120 million women access to contraceptives by the year 2020. And the whole idea is to put this back on the global health agenda. It hasn't been forefront on the global health agenda for a very long time, and it's never been done in a way that's really woman-centric. And this is about saying this is about women. This is about giving them access to the tools that they want so they can decide if and when they want to have a child. And women.
I would say our biggest risk that we took was stepping into this contraceptive space. Because of intense political pressure in the United States and some religious pressure, the global health community had backed off on contraceptives. And in 2012, we led an initiative and stepped back in because it is the greatest anti-poverty tool in the world. When women can time and space the births of their children are healthier, they can educate the kids, women can stay in school longer, and they can enter the workforce. We forget in the United States that it was the advent of the birth control pill that allowed women to work.
The sort of skepticism about vaccine safety and the conspiracy theories that vaccines are being used to hurt people as opposed to help them is really quite troubling.
There are pockets and significant pockets of the country where vaccines aren't happening because of those, the anti-vaxxers or whatever you want to call them, who have made significant headway in trying to convince parents they shouldn't vaccinate children.
I spend my time on the countries where you still have, in the case of measles, over 300,000 kids dying a year. In the case of diarrheal diseases, over 1 million a year. There's 6 million kids a year still dying. Why aren't we getting vaccines out in Africa for diarrhea, for respiratory disease? Why don't we yet have a vaccine for malaria? Those are the things that I push forward. I wouldn't say I get angry, but I'm really impatient that we're not moving as fast as I'd like. As we make the world healthier, is the population going to get so big that feeding everybody and maintaining the environment is going to be impossible?
Turns out Bill Gates says no to sharing vaccine formulas with global poor to end the pandemic. I thought this guy was a good guy. I thought he was one of the good billionaires. He's just a guy who wants to help people. That's all Bill Gates is. He's the richest guy in the world who wants to help. You know how the richest guy in the world is the nicest guy in the world? So how in the F did Bill Gates get to be the one to decide? That's my question, too. Why does Bill Gates get to decide about the facts for global vaccine? What the F and F? Bill Gates, one of the world's richest men and most powerful philanthropists, argued that lifting patent protections on COVID-19 vaccine technology and sharing recipes with the world to foster a massive ramp-up in manufacturing and distribution is a bad idea. Asked if he thought it would be helpful to have vaccine recipes be shared, Gates quickly answered no. Bill Gates, whose massive fortune as founder of Microsoft relies on intellectual property laws of billions of dollars in personal wealth, said, "The thing that's holding things back in terms of the global vaccine rollout," continued Bill Gates, "is not intellectual property. You've got to do the trial on these things. Every manufacturing process needs to be looked at in a very careful way."
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
But sin in the ordinary sense that we regard it, do you believe or do you not believe?
Well, what? What would they be?
Do you believe that infidelity is a sin?
Well, I'm not going to specify what I think is sin. I've stated what I think is the worst sin.
Yes, but then you asked me to say...
This investigation of Planned Parenthood is based on false premises, one after another after another. It's time to stop wasting time, get on with meaningful work, and stop picking on women and trying to take their choice away. I yield back the balance of it.
Do you and each of you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? This is Dr. Anthony Levatino. Dr. Levatino is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist.
Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Her baby is the length of your hand plus a couple of inches, and she's been feeling her baby kick for the last several weeks. A D&E procedure is a blind abortion, so picture yourself introducing this and grabbing anything you can blindly and pull, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. And use this instrument again and again to tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. Head in the baby that size is about the size of a large plum. Can't see it, but you pretty good idea you've got it if you've got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Then you could pull out skull pieces. And you have a day like I had a lot of times. Sometimes a little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations, you just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose.
Planned Parenthood is on the defensive this morning, facing an investigation of its practices. An undercover video alleges the reproductive health organization sells body parts from abortions. The group says the claims are flat out untrue.
A lot of people want intact parts these days.
In graphic detail, Planned Parenthood's Senior Director of Medical Services described how to preserve valuable fetal tissue during an abortion.
We've been very good at getting parts on liver because we know that, so I'm not going to crush that part. I'm going to basically crush below, I'm going to crush above, and I'm going to see if I can get it intact.
Over wine and salad, she answered questions about the organization providing fetal tissue to researchers, typically for a fee.
I would say it's probably anywhere from $30 to $100, depending on the facility and what's involved.
For women who obtain abortions, and I could just not be more opposed to that kind of thinking.
If you go with what Hillary is saying, in the 9th month, you can take the baby and rip the baby out of the womb of the mother just prior to the birth of the baby. Now, you can say that that's okay, and Hillary can say that that's okay, but it's not okay with me.
Using that kind of scare rhetoric is just terribly unfortunate.
But they really had this idea that either voluntarily or through government, you could sit down and pick, this is a quality person, which is not going to be us, and this is a bad quality person, and they're going to breed, and that way human beings are going to improve that way. But the consequences of when you're picking who can have kids, and it's not like people that you and I would agree with, okay, this person's an unfit mother. It's really like people who are like politically undesirable, maybe people who have some kind of disease or illness. The number of kids that we have that need, loving parents is just
who makes these people be in charge of the solution when it turns out, I've seen documentaries on the whole eugenics movement, most of them ended up in mental institutions and stuff. They were crazy control freaks, some of the worst people. So you can't make one group in charge, just like communism, it doesn't work.
It is literally communism. Yeah, another word for communism at the time was scientific socialism, right? So they were saying if you have freedom means chaos. No one's in charge. Everyone does what they want. You're going to have disastrous consequences.
And that chaos innovates. That chaos is beautiful.
Right, because sometimes when you have freedom, people are going to say things you don't like. And the thing is, what happens when you have governments in charge of this, if you take one population, you could do this kind of in a shorthand way. If I take this group which I like and I make sure that they have food, and this group that I don't like, I starve them, well, that's a kind of a backdoor eugenics way because I'm encouraging this group to reproduce because they have the calories, and these are not going to have kids. The kids are going to starve to death. So I don't think people appreciate when they talk about kind of the horrors of socialism, just how pervasive it is, that nothing is outside their purview, including who you're sleeping with and whether you reproduce. And we see this in Korea. So North and South Korea have been separated since the 40s, which they've been a one nation for literally thousands of years, genetically identical.
Why is everyone so fucking stupid? Why aren't more people intelligent, like me? I'm the smartest, most clever, most physically fit, but nobody else seems to realize it. When I change the world, maybe they'll notice me. And until then, I'll just be lonely. Yeah, riddle lonely. Poor riddle me.
What am I to do when 24 million people look to me as their leader, their God?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Jordan! They call me incompetent.
That's exactly what they said about me when I scored this interview.
No way.
I pretend like their insults don't get to me. But they do.
You know what's more destructive than a nuclear bomb?
Words.
Where'd you get that body from?
I got it from my daddy. Got it from my daddy. Got it.
Daughter?
Did you do it?
Yes.
What did it cost?
Everything. What'd you do?
He says most people are just food for a brutal cosmos, like the children Tommy fathers in Fruppyland just so he can eat them for sustenance.
The universe is basically an animal. It grazes on the ordinary, creates infinite idiots just to eat them. Not unlike your friend Timmy.
Tommy. Tommy's devouring his offspring calls back to Cronus of Greek mythology, who ate his children to prevent being overthrown, symbolically fighting time and the inevitable victory of the future over the past. We are born only to be promptly eaten up by time, and most of us, like Tommy's offspring, don't ever question it.
Eat up my flesh so you may survive.
But smart people are not content to be dumb meat that's pointlessly consumed by the universe. When your eyes are open, you want more. You want to be master of your reality.
You know, smart people get a chance to climb on top, take reality for a ride.
60 years in terms of human evolution is a drop in the bucket. And we're seeing not only differences in terms of intelligence because of this, severe malnutrition in the North, but also differences in height. If you have two kids and this kid is going to get fed and is going to have, a thriving environment, but then you're depriving nourishment from them, they end up becoming the runt, although they did not have to be that way. And when you have things like this in these totalitarian states, they use food as a weapon. When you have three networks like they had in the 50s and 60s, for example, ABC, NBC, CBS, everyone came home, they would watch one of the three, and they would basically have a consensus. Now, between the three networks, they were all hard left, kind of had that as their ideology.
If I told you that Tommy Macklin was a black guy, you'd be crying tears and saying, give the poor ex-con a chance. But you know he's a white guy, so you're against him. Well, I ain't prejudiced that way. I ain't prejudiced against no man just because his skin is the same color as my own.
Yeah, Archie has lots of white friends.
You're damn right, and I'm going to get more.
Some people in the audience are old enough to remember 1964 when Barry Goldwater ran for president. They completely were in the position to destroy him because he had no mechanism to get his point of view out there elsewhere. Come 16 years later, you had Reagan because you had more mechanisms for conservatives, and I don't consider myself a conservative, by the way, to get their point of view out there.
And Reagan knew that and got rid of the fairness doctrine.
Well, now let me get this straight. You love Dennis. That's right. He's a wonderful fellow.
One of the best.
Uh-huh. But he's such a big ham.
The biggest ham in Hollywood.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Many of the most compelling arguments against abortion are as old as our civilization. Indeed, I would submit that a reverence for all human life is one of the distinguishing marks of true civilization. We know in particular that when an abortion is performed, the unborn child often feels pain.
To perceive professionals as being educated, trust the experts, right? So of course
it's a uniform.
It's a right. It's exactly right. You trust the cop because he's wearing that uniform. You trust the firefighter, so on and so forth. I'm the producer. I'm the reporter, the corporate journalist on these venues, spreading really depraved and malevolent ideas. But because I'm in a suit and I'm calm, look at Dan Rather. In 1994, when the Republicans took over Congress for the first time in 40 years, you would think at sometimes you'd want one of the parties to switch. First time in 40 years, he's saying the American people have thrown a temper tantrum tonight.
Don, I think that the danger of this moment in history boils down to one question. Do you have any idea how low this president is prepared to sink in an effort to defend himself, his power, and his money? The answer is No one knows. His critics don't know. His enablers don't know. I'm not sure the president himself knows how low he's prepared to go. You know, I expect much more erratic behavior, much more dangerous behavior than we've seen already, which makes it all the more important that everyone try as best we can to contain this president and the damage that he's doing to the country.
What do you make of what we're seeing?
Well, I make something new because I haven't seen it before. You know, I think Donald Trump lies by default. I mean, he just says things, doesn't care what it says, it doesn't matter to him, and it doesn't matter that even if he knows they're not true.
So a lot of times when they don't get their way, that air of professionalism and assertiveness drops, and you realize that behind that smile, as Ayn Rand put it back in the day, there was something sinister and something evil. And what the beautiful thing about social media is when you scratch these people and, you know, kind of tweet at them and they get upset, you really see that there is a really nasty sneer behind that veneer of calm professionalism.
Because that's a horror movie cover, like a clown that eats children.
Have you not watched The Simpsons? They took 800 takes. This was the best one.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from both of you how DC journalists are adjusting to the Biden era. Jim, this is your first weekend anchoring here on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. Do you feel like your rundown, your lineup is really different than it would have been in the Trump years?
When you're asking me if I was run down, I thought you were referring to how I felt during the Trump era. No.
Like, but I mean, how is he not self-aware that he looks like a true nightmare vision?
But I don't know if you've seen this on C-SPAN. They had him talking.
Everybody attacked him.
Yeah.
Ask Brian to, on national television, admit he and his network are a bunch of liars about Donald Trump.
Yeah. Mr. Stelter is the biggest minister of misinformation I have ever heard, and I'm a news junkie. He made the statement just a few minutes ago that he is all the stories are always evolving. Yeah, his stories absolutely evolve.
Brian Stelter.
Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it.
I was just wondering if you still feel like Michael Avenatti is the greatest thing in the world and should run for president of the United States.
That's
and
funny.
my suggestion is whatever CNN says, do the opposite and you'll be fine.
Aurora, Indiana, this is Robert. Good morning. You're on with Brian Stelter.
You know, CNN is just something it's a joke. It's a joke. This guy tells more lies, and Fox gives more news than CNN does in their...
What lie? What lie did I tell?
2 years. It's nothing but lies.
They're also covering, not CNN specifically, they're covering up for Jeffrey Epstein and all his assaults.
In a new lawsuit, Virginia Gouffre, seen here as a teenager standing next to Prince Andrew, alleges that she was forced to engage in sexual acts with him on 3 separate occasions.
Nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken.
And you don't recollect having your hand round her waist in Ghislaine Maxwell's house on any occasion, even if it was a different date?
I'm terribly sorry, but if I, as a member of the royal family, and I have a photograph taken, and I take very, very few photographs, I am not one to, as it were, hug, and public displays of affection are not something that I do.
An invitation into Donald Trump's world. Footage from 1992 found in the NBC archives shows the future president welcoming Jeffrey Epstein to his Mar-a-Lago estate. The get-together more than a decade before Epstein pleaded guilty to prostitution charges in Florida. Both men are seen enjoying themselves, Trump pointing out women dancing in front of them.
Federal prosecutors said yesterday video of Epstein's jail cell when he made his first suicide attempt no longer exists. That's a quote. Epstein died by suicide weeks later on August 10th. The well-connected 66-year-old was accused of sexually abusing dozens of underage girls.
You know who I think is much more sinister is Anderson Cooper.
Oh, I totally agree.
This quote really kills me. My mother is the only person left who knew me as a kid,
So therefore, there should be no secrets between us. I don't want any secrets between us.
Yeah.
But don't you think a mother and son should have some secrets?
It's not so much secrets, just I don't think there should be anything left unsaid. Like for me, my dad died when I was 10, and I used to have this fantasy that he had maybe written me a letter, and the letter would show up when I turned 18 or when I turned 21. It would tell me all the things I didn't know about him. It would tell me everything he wanted for my life. And of course, there wasn't any letter. And I realized I didn't want the same thing with my mom.
She was born into one of America's wealthiest families.
Gloria Vanderbilt is going on 13 now and quite a sports enthusiast.
And from the beginning, the world was fascinated by the trial and adventures of glamorous Gloria Vanderbilt.
I just think the public perception of her is very different than the person I actually know. And she's 92 now. She's been making headlines from the time she was born. And I kind of wanted to reveal the person that I know and the person that she really is.
Yeah, he's a blue.
He's
blood.
a Vanderbilt.
He's a Vanderbilt. You cut him, it bleeds blue. And for him to be like, I'm a man of the people, that's much more sinister.
Oh, when you go online, it says he owns nothing. He gave it all to charity. He's just like Bill Gates. It's all tax exempt. The man's worth probably $500 billion.
Yes.
And this whole globalist attack is an exercise of raw power. They said in the Rockefeller Foundation documents 11 years ago, Operation Lockstep, they would try this to maintain control. And you read their internal CFR stuff that leaks.
Let me illustrate. Improved public health has caused the world's infant mortality rate to decline by 60% over the last 40 years. However, the result of these positive measures is a world population that has risen during the same short period of time geometrically to almost 6 billion people, and could easily. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident.
What you realize is people in power will say whatever they need to say in order to further their agenda and maintain their power. So right now we're hearing about this Delta variant and, this Ligma variant, what other variants. And immediately these things are DOA. People are saying, I said, I no longer care if I get COVID or somebody else does it. We're over this crap. I'm not ruining my restaurant. I'm not ruining my neighborhood. I'm not wearing these dopey masks, which is like wearing a condom with 2 holes in it. They still have a lot of inertia because they've been at this for a long time.
That they wanted 90% to take the injections. It's really like 50%. They admit they're failing. They admit people are refusing them and are not adopting this because
increasingly, not only are people not saying yes to some stranger wagging their finger at them, but they're laughing at that person's face and returning it twice as hard. They have been trained to think, I'm the good guy. I will yell at Alex Jones and say, why aren't you wearing a mask? Everyone's going to stand up and applaud. And they haven't, CNN, all these other outlets haven't programmed them to be like, okay, what happens when that dude says, go F yourself? What are you going to do then, sweetheart? And they have nothing. They really don't have a backup plan if there's pushback. And that is why I think you see it over and over on Twitter and other social media. Oh my gosh, I can't handle it. No one's listening to the plan. It's like, too bad. That is the reality. That's how you're going to have to deal with it going forward.
A society that is selecting more and more for a narrow band of talents that is fairly well captured by what we call IQ. And it's a kind of winner-take-all situation. 500 years ago, if you had a very high IQ and you're just pushing a plow next to your neighbor, you had no real advantage. But now you can start a hedge fund or you can start a software company, and we're seeing this real shocking disparity in good fortune, really.
Now, the Armed Forces has experimented with IQ tests since 1919. And in the last 20 years, a law was passed as a consequence of that analysis, which was that it was illegal to induct anyone into the armed forces who had an IQ of less than 83. Now the question is why? And the answer was, all of that effort put in by the armed forces indicated that if you had an IQ of 83 or less, there wasn't anything that you could be trained to do in the military that wasn't positively counterproductive. Now you got to think about that, because the military is chronically desperate for people. Right? They have to go out and recruit, and it's not easy. And so they're desperate to get their hands on every body they can possibly manage, which was the armed forces was also set up from a policy perspective to take people in the underclass, let's say,
and train them and move them up at least into the working class or maybe the middle class. So there's a policy element to it too. And so even from that perspective, you could see that the military is desperate to bring people in. But with an IQ of 83 or less, it's not happening. Okay, so how many people have an IQ of 83 or less? 10%. In a complex society like ours, and one that's becoming increasingly complex, there isn't anything for 10% of the population to do.
You're a mama, Jenny.
I'm a mama. His name's Forrest.
Like me.
I named him after his daddy.
He got a daddy named Forrest, too?
You're his daddy, Forrest.
This is an ideological issue, in that it's almost like an impossible subject to breach. Yeah. Like, you can't even discuss the fact that certain races demonstrate low IQ, and then let's look at what could be the cause of those. Even discussing that somehow or another is so inherently racist that it must be ignored or must be silenced.
As you say, there's certain topics are considered so politically fraught that you cannot discuss them no matter what is true. Like it's just there has to be a firewall between your conversation about reality and these sorts of facts. We know that there are people walking around like Elon Musk, who gets out of bed every morning and does the work of like 4,000 people, right? And people who just are struggling to work at Starbucks and hold down a job. We don't say one person is more valuable politically and socially than another, even though one person is capable of doing massive things that most other people aren't.
This is Elon Musk. Who? Elon Musk. I'm in charge of the whole Mars colonization project. Oh, congrats. Let the camera get a good look at your face, Chad. I want the world to see the man who gave everything to ensure that humanity's future will be among the stars. Okay.
No, don't take your helmet off!
But what's happening on the left now is at either of those tiers of conversation, there are just straight up allegations of racism that hit you the moment you touch certain facts.
Can I say big tech and big boxes that led the lockdown because they'd already done the actuaries and studies knowing they would expand their market? Well, that's total monopoly.
And also we saw them cheering on when small businesses were looted and destroyed. And they were cheering on when Amazon, all these other big corporate entities. They were cheering on when the lockdowns continued, which drove all these restaurants and other places and businesses out of business. And that, of course, goes to their benefit. You still got to eat. If I can't go to the restaurant, can't go to the store, well, these other places deliver, and that just makes them wealthier and it makes them more powerful. Yes, because this is what happened. World War I. Washington took over the entire country for the fight the Great War. You can understand why they have to do that. This is a huge war. But then 15 years later, when you had FDR, he said, look, we did all this already during the Great War, and now it's the Great Depression, which is a far bigger threat to America than the Kaiser. We're going to take over the entire country again. You can imagine it being said right now.
They're already saying it. They want climate lockdowns.
I didn't even know that. So that's the thing. You're not Nostradamus. It's like these people aren't that clever.
I will let the gods decide my fate. I demand a trial by dance.
From my daddy, I got it. From my daddy, I got it. Hey, where'd you get that body from? I got it from my daddy. I got it from my daddy. I got it. Hey, where'd you get that body from? I got it from my daddy.
We are anonymous. We are legion. United as one. Divided by zero. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
No expression. Hide my head. I wanna drown my sorrow. No tomorrow. No tomorrow. And I find it kinda funny. I find it kinda sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Large and open. Mad